All in the court, please rise. You may be seated.
We, the Tribunal, find the Schutzstaffel to be a criminal organization, and the leaders and anyone who voluntarily joined the Schutzstaffel after 1938 should be brought to trial for membership therein before national, military, or occupation courts because the Schutzstaffels systematically violated human rights and crimes against humanity. Anyone who joined the SS after 1938, when it became clear that the Schutzstaffel would be in charge of destruction, mass murder, and war being waged against Jews and other people deemed unworthy of life, knew they were unintentionally joining an organization whose intent was to kill. Heinrich Himmler's speech at Posen is one example of how what the Schutzstaffel was doing was not secret, that people knew. The tribunal was persuaded by the arguments of the prosecution and the evidence submitted that the Schutzstaffel is a criminal organization. The atrocities that the Schutzstaffel committed were related to crimes against humanity because the Einsatzgruppen, which is under the Schutzstaffel, would go into cities and kill people, and the Schutzstaffel ran deportation and death camps. As already decided in the pretrial motion, the motion on behalf of all defense, the current international laws, along with the charter, are equipped to deal with prosecuting the SS as a criminal organization and does allow current international laws and the charter to prosecute the organization with an effective and fair process. Although the defense brought up an important point in their motion that whole divisions of the SS were insignificantly involved with the wider conspiracy supposedly at play, the people who joined the Schutzstaffel voluntarily therefore knew what the Schutzstaffel was doing. As Attorney Bretman brought up, by being a part of the SS after 1938, the SS members shared the same morals and beliefs about the dehumanization of others, and all were aware of what was going on by taking the oath. Although the leaders of the SS are the ones that started this criminal organization, because of the points already brought up, the SS was able to grow, and therefore each person was aware of what was going on. The tribunal believes that it is crucial that the leaders and anyone who voluntarily joined after 1938 should stand trial. It should start with the leaders being tried, sent down and out from there, who had the most power after voluntarily joining in 1938. It is important to note that we are not suggesting that everyone who was a part of the Schutzstaffel who voluntarily joined after 1938 is criminal, merely that it will expedite bringing individual members to justice.
The court will now take a brief in-court recess. Panel 2 will be leaving for the next case.
Please rise. We'll start in less than 5 minutes.
No, so the benefit. So this one.
This is
Cough attack happens. So when you're questioning him,
Let us continue. Yeah.
you're just gonna go to the podium.
Yeah.
And then say, we will now. Yes. I know, just so. Ava, does one of you want to come on this side? Where's that note sheet that you shared with me? Did you email it to me? I did. Roman, not you. Can't be working. I should make the now and give my introduction. Okay, wait, don't go yet. Dude, he can do it. I just need to give me a second. Okay, wait, two times. The court will now hear the IMTV Goring case, beginning with a statement from the prosecution, followed by remarks from the defense team, including a statement from Mr. Goring himself.
We will now hear prosecution's opening statement. Please approach the stand.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. We are here to show how the defendant Herman Goering is guilty of conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. His actions were unquestionably focused on doing what was best for Germany and Germany only, while committing heinous crimes against the human race and planning and waging aggressive wars, while holding multiple powerful titles, such as plenipotentiary of the 4-year plan, Reich Marshal, head of the Luftwaffe, president of the Reichstag, and more. Firstly, I will speak about Herman Goering's actions following his creation of the 4-year plan. Being plenipotentiary allowed him to carry out his intentions around not only Germany's war economy, but also the general economy. His first focus was addressing the worries for food productions, shortages, and controlling living space. His pursuit of these issues make his actions illegal due to him administering food and services, as explained in evidence document 1375-PS, only to benefit those that were considered to be German, as well as taking the properties of those who didn't fit Germany's expectations because they were part of another so-called race. Goering was also part of planning the next steps that Germans took after occupying other territories, such as dealing with prisoners of war, sending Jews and Poles to camps, taking properties and making them German property, and forcing labor amongst the citizens of the occupied territories. Hitler mentions in evidence document 1862.PS how he appoints Goering, who takes full responsibility for executing the 4-year plan. As Hitler states, quote, "The execution of the 4-year plan, I entrust to Minister President General Goering. Minister President General Goering shall take all steps necessary for the execution of the task put before him," unquote. The 4-year plan also consisted of Goering devising a plan to answer the Jewish question, which is a Nazi goal to eliminate the Jews from Europe. Additionally, Goering was responsible as head of the Luftwaffe and Reich Minister for the Air to plan and execute aggressive wars, leading him to break multiple treaties, agreements, and laws, most notably the Treaty of Versailles. Goering was given the power to take charge of using the air force to attack threats to Germany's power over an abundance of Europe. It was his job to organize training of men and appoint men into service to grow the strength of the military troops. He was also commander of the SA, which later replaced the previous police force, according to evidence document 3252-PS, giving Goering new ways to take initiatives and movements to execute his intentions of the German common plan of conspiracy. He was heavily involved in the politics of Germany, doing as much as he could to spread Hitler's message, In evidence document 3252-PS, from an extract from the book Hermann Goering, author Eric Ritzbach states that Goering prepared diplomatically and politically in a long-lasting and hard struggle the basis for Hitler's rise. He was involved in the manipulation and brainwashing of German citizens to join the Nazi Party and become followers of their horrid views. Secondly, Goering's acts of committing the crime of conspiracy led him to further involve himself in other crimes, such as crimes against the peace. The defendant violated multiple treaties, agreements, and assurances, including the Treaty of Saint-Germain, Treaty of Versailles, and the Treaties of Mutual Guarantee signed at Locarno. One of Goering's main focuses when it came to ignoring the treaties that Germany had set forth before the rise of the Nazi Party was to expand his military as much as possible. He was constantly asking German officials above him to request to form more squadrons of Air Force groups for special purposes, as mentioned in evidence document 1584-I-PS, in a teletype from Goering himself to Himmler. His constant wanting of expanding the military is a prime example of him violating the Treaty of Versailles, which consisted of the disarmament of Germany, payment of very large reparations to the Allies, and demilitarization of the Rhineland. The Treaty of Saint-Germain concerned the values of recognizing the independence of Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, and the kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. Goering's military roles consisted of him directing troops to invade countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary multiple times to overthrow their governments and take them under German rule. One situation was mentioned in evidence document 1014-PS, where it had been planned for complete destruction of Poland, involving all military branches of Germany, which ultimately can relate to Goering's involvement due to his role as head of the Air Force. The treaties of mutual guarantees' main concern was that Germany, Belgium, and France would never attack each other except in legitimate defense or in consequence of a League of Nations obligation. This treaty was violated immensely during the entirety of World War II. Goering had all disregard to countless of treaties that allowed Germany to live in peace with the other European countries, including the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which he demonstrated through multiple activities, including leading the bombing campaign against Britain. I will now pass on to Prosecutor Stephan, where he will discuss the measures of Goering being guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Thank you, Justices.
Good morning, Your Honors. The defendant Hermann Goering is guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Carrying out Hitler's goal of the extermination of the Jewish race in aggressive war, Goering committed inhumane and illegal acts as plenipotentiary of the four-year plan, Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force, and head of the Gestapo. I would first like to address the defendant's violation of the Geneva and Hague Conventions by mistreating prisoners of war. As Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force, Hermann Goering was responsible for running prisoner of war camps. In evidence document 1193-PS, Goering states, quote, "The Russian is easily satisfied. Therefore, he should be fed lightly without serious infractions upon our food balance," end quote. This directly violates Article 11 of the Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War because Goering is rationing food, which the convention clearly states is illegal. Goering also violated the Geneva Convention by planning to keep Ukrainian prisoners of war in captivity forever, which can be seen in evidence document 1193-PS. This violates Article 75 of the Geneva Convention of Prisoners of War, as the convention clearly states all prisoners must be released at the end of the war. Let's move on to another important charge in the war crimes indictment. Hermann Goering is guilty of theft of property from occupied territories. As plenipotentiary of the four-year plan, and out of his own accord, the defendant stole many works of art from Poland, France, and other nations during the war. These art treasures were placed in either Hitler or Goering's personal collection or German museums. The Einsenstab, who Goering fully endorsed, as seen in evidence document 1015-I-PS, was responsible for plundering art from occupied territories, which is a war crime as well as a violation of the Hague Convention. On a more broad scale, Goering violated the Hague Convention by ordering property of nationals of a former Polish state is subject to the confiscation. This order is in evidence document 1665-PS. Goering called for the sequestration of property to better the struggling German economy which he was appointed to rebuild as plenipotentiary of the four-year plan. Goering's order also gave Germany more living space and caused the Germanization of Poland. Hermann Goering is also guilty of the mass destruction of occupied territories. In a letter to his half-brother, Goering described the annihilation of England by aerial bombings. The Luftwaffe, which Goering was in charge of, leveled districts of Britain while destroying unprotected civilian buildings. This is seen in evidence document 3775-PS. Goering ordered the Air Force to carry out his want for the unnecessary destruction of civilian properties in England, which violated Article 25 of the Hague Convention and is considered a war crime. To segue into the next indictment, the defendant Hermann Goering is also guilty of crimes against humanity. All the crimes against humanity Goering committed revolved around the central idea of the persecution of specific groups, Jews and communists. As the supreme leader of the SA and leader of the Gestapo, the defendant was guilty of the horrendous actions that were performed at the concentration camps. The Gestapo was responsible for inciting fear to every German citizen and using that fear as a weapon. While the Gestapo did not pull the trigger at the concentration camps, they were responsible for rounding up Jews and communists to be deported to the camps and ultimately to be killed. In an excerpt from Goering's book, he stated that he rounded up the first few thousand communists and sent them to the camps strictly because of their political beliefs. This can be found in evidence document 2324-PS. Once people were sent to the concentration camps, they were forced to do grueling labor as well as be humiliated. At times, the punishment even went as far as hanging prisoners from trees and murder. I would next like to direct your attention to the night of November 9th, 1938, better known as Kristallnacht, as well as the following days. In a meeting where Goering was a prominent contributor, it was decided that the police would not protect Jewish people on the night of broken glass. On that night, Jewish cultural life was ruthlessly destroyed, from the vandalized shops to the torched synagogues. As seen in evidence document 2324-PS, the following day of Kristallnacht, the police, who Goering fully endorsed, arrested over 30,000 Jews. Also following Kristallnacht, as seen in evidence document 1412-PS, Goering made a decree which stated Jews of Germany had to collectively pay the Reich 1 billion Reichsmark. Economic persecution was also continuously brought on Jews before and during the war by Goering to execute the four-year plan and eliminate Jews from Europe. Most important point I'll make today is Goering's direct order for the extermination of Jewish people. The defendant ordered Reinhard Heydrich, who was the chief of security, to plan and execute all necessary preparations in regard to organizational and financial matters for bringing about a complete solution to the Jewish question. This is seen in evidence document 710-PS. The quote-unquote solution to the Jewish question ultimately meant eliminating Jews from the economy and public sphere of Europe, and to do that he needed to exterminate the entire Jewish race. Due to this order to Heydrich, Goering is responsible for the mass shootings and other merciless tactics of extermination of the 6 million Jews killed during the war. The defendant Hermann Goering committed unethical actions against Jewish people and communists, including their extermination and removal from the economy. As plenipotentiary of the four-year plan, supreme leader of the Gestapo and SA, and a prominent member of the Nazi government, Goering is guilty of carrying out crimes against humanity. Believing Jews, communists, and non-German civilians were inferior was the root of Goering's guilt regarding all four indictments. In evidence document 3458-PS, Goering gave a speech about his belief that equality does not exist. This idea of superiority and inferiority amongst different races and political beliefs caused Goering to conspirize and commit heinous war crimes and crimes against humanity before and during the war, along with crimes against the peace.
We will now hear the defense's opening statement on behalf of Mr. Goering. Please approach the stand.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. Hermann Wilhelm Goering is a highly decorated war veteran with a stellar reputation. He took pride in his country, and his foremost goal was always to build upon Germany's quality and respectability. The defendant was drawn to the Nazi Party for its first demands. In the 1920 National Socialistic Yearbook, the second point of the Nazi Party's philosophy reads, and I quote, "We demand equality of rights for the German people in respect to the other nations." The Nazi Party explicitly states that they are respectful of other nations, and these are the terms Goering agreed to. On the count of conspiracy, Goering held a plethora of titles which he accepted for prestige under the Führer. They are as follows: Reich Marshal, the Reich Commissioner of Aviation, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, Director of the Four-Year Plan, Minister without portfolio, Deputy to the Führer, Speaker of the German Parliament, President of the Reichstag, Prime Minister of Prussia, President of the Prussian State Council, and the Master of the German Hunt and German Forests. As you can infer from the extensive list of titles I recited, Goering did not have the time to actively take part in every title he was associated with. There's simply not enough hours in a day. However, of those titles, he founded the German Hunt and German Forests. The German Hunt and German Forests is a peaceful society that promotes ethical hunting. As his club took off, he pulled away from German affairs that were becoming increasingly unethical. He resigned in his roles tied to the Gestapo and German protective custody affairs in 1934. He transferred those responsibilities to Heinrich Himmler. The goals of the Gestapo drastically changed when others took charge of it. Goering's police force intended to bring down monsters. The need for the Gestapo was there because of the atrocities those monsters committed. They endangered German women and children. To my next point, Goering saw gruesome situations during and post-war. Germans living in filth, the economy crashing, and children going hungry, death. Goering wanted solutions to these problems. He wanted to make life better for the German people. He created the Four-Year Plan to restore Germany's excellence and pride, to make a comeback from the tragic conditions they were left in post-World War. Goering's Four-Year Plan was not a plan rooted in the Nazi Party or seeking out aggressive war. It was a plan based on German nationalism. Goering explicitly expressed beforehand that Germany would never use its air force to disturb other nations' peace, meaning that his plans were never to wage aggressive war. In an interview in 1935 with the London Daily Mail, Goering stated, begin quote, "The German Air Force is just as passionately permeated with the will to defend the fatherland, to the last as it is convinced, on the other hand, that it will never be employed to threaten the peace of other nations," end quote. His plans were never to wage aggressive war. In that same interview, Goering repeatedly uses the word defense when describing the use of the Luftwaffe. The Four-Year Plan reimposed Germany's self-sufficiency. It resulted in the ability to defend Germans from the monsters threatening public safety. All in all, Goering was determined to do everything in his power to protect the German people. This was not a political mission, but a personal mission for Hermann Goering. On the count of crimes against peace, after experiencing the traumas of war himself, Goering had not an ounce of desire to re-engage in aggressive warfare. In a letter from Dr. Uwe Bereiter, a respectable veteran too, Uwe Bereiter states that, begin quote, he then stressed with great emphasis that Germany's foreign policy would have to be conducted in such a way that war would not ensue under any circumstances. The present generation was still feeling the effects of a lost world war. The outbreak of another war would be a shock to the German people, end quote. Letting go of peace was merely a last resort for Goering. Germany's policy for foreign affairs was not war following conflict. Goering and Germany offered Britain a peace offering named An Appeal to Reason in 1940. Britain sought out conflict with Germany. Violence was entirely reliant on the British government's failure to cooperate and handle their affairs peacefully. Goering was not an aggressor, and when Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands decided to band with the monsters, he responded by following the Führer's orders of a blitzkrieg. It was the only logical response to those threats, and he was forced into this position. If he hadn't followed through, the German people would have been even more unsafe. He made difficult decisions artfully with the best of his abilities. On to my next point. The Treaty of Versailles left unfair, unjust, and frankly ridiculous restrictions on Germany. By not bringing up about the Luftwaffe, Goering would have endangered more lives. The Treaty of Versailles left Germany in a state of ongoing poverty. Regions were filled with widespread illness, which would have eventually traveled all across Europe. Furthermore, German people lived in constant fear that others would prey on them and that they would have no means to defend themselves. As the Reich Minister of the Luftwaffe, Goering did whatever he had to keep his country safe from the monsters knocking at their doors. The non-aggression pact would have been broken without the Luftwaffe. and it would have caused more German children to die in ruthless circumstances. As for Goering's four-year plan, in a 1938 Gao meeting, Goering declared that the establishment of new raw material resources within the Reich was for the purpose of making Germany independent of other countries and not in order to prepare for aggressive warfare. The materials from the four-year plan were strictly to be used inwardly towards themselves. In relation to Germany's recently formed military, the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, ratified in 1791 and set on precedents from European countries such as Britain, promised people the right to keep and bear arms and for a well-regulated militia. Goering's plan was inspired by these key ideas. The absence of Goering's four-year plan would result in the construction of a violent and aggressive, unregulated militia. The Treaty of Versailles enabled violence, but Goering prevented those gruesome situations from playing out. He created a regulated militia to put Germany in a less vulnerable state. Goering took inspiration from the United States government when evaluating the best strategy to minimize Germany's risk. In 1868, the American people stepped over an agreement at Fort Laramie between them and a group of their monsters. When gold, which could change the lives of so many Americans significantly, was discovered in the Black Hills, the United States government did the only logical thing to do. They traveled west for the betterment of Americans. They went unpunished. The Fort Laramie situation, in reality, benefited all parties. The United States monsters couldn't do anything with that land out west. If they had, they would have already excavated the gold. Instead, Americans took over the land and the economy boomed. Goering did the same in the name of good health for German citizens. To conclude, Goering's exceptional reputation and insistence on peace sets him apart from heartless criminals here today. His four-year plan lifted hopeless Germans out of critical and impossible conditions. The defendant utilized the Luftwaffe to protect his people from the monsters. These monsters set fire to public buildings and intended to cause as much harm and chaos as possible in Goering's community. His decisions regarding the Luftwaffe, four-year plan, and foreign affairs were difficult, but logical and thought through. Uwe Berreiter speaks to Goering's intentions, begin quote. I would like to express here my belief that the field marshal, if it had depended on him, would not have gambled on war, as Hitler did in 1939. As it will be related in due course, he took a decisive stand for peace in September 1938, end quote. Goering is not a protege to Hitler. He is a man who values peace and prosperity, and he will stand by his country and its people until the end. His devotion to the German people and their safety should be commended. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Honors, ladies and gentlemen of the court. I'm here today to explain how this man, Hermann Goering, is not guilty of charges relating to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Hermann Goering was a dedicated patriot above all else. As my co-counsel stated previously, he had many roles to fill. Staying on top of all those responsibilities was stressful and challenging to uphold with grace and composure, and as can be imagined, one can crack under pressure. Although he had many jobs, Goering was excluded from foreign affairs, so it was uncommon for him to be present during any decisions made about foreigners. In addition to everything else, Goering was a fan of exquisite arts from all around the world. In January of 1940, when Germany occupied different territories, Goering made it a crucial point to make sure none of the well-crafted Polish arts were destroyed. Out of concern, Goering secured the Polish art to protect the cultural pieces from getting destroyed. He even took extra precautions by distributing the art treasures to other safe places, different members of the Reichstag, and Adolf Hitler, to protect the art treasures from destruction. When the Führer of Germany, Adolf Hitler, decided to start occupying neighboring territories, Goering sought out previous beneficial practices he could implement into the Germanization of other countries' territories. One that Goering took into note was in the mid-1800s in the United States. President Andrew Jackson made the noble decision to gain more living space, or Lebensraum, for his people. In turn, he had to take indigenous lands in which the people could either leave or adapt to American ways and ideals. This act of national preservation was named the Indian Removal Act. The Indian Removal Act stated the Indian title has been extinguished and that the land would be Americanized. Unfortunately, this noble decision Mr. Jackson made violated a previous treaty called the Treaty of 1791. When the late president was asked to give a statement about the matter, he stated how it would relieve the whole state of Mississippi and the western part of Alabama of Indian occupancy, and therefore benefit the United States in terms of population, wealth, and power. To further quote the late president, it will separate the Indians from immediate contact with settlements of whites, free them from the power of the states, enable them to pursue happiness in their own way and under their own rude institutions, will retard the process of decay, which is lessening their numbers, and perhaps cause them gradually and under the protection of the government and through the influence of good counsels to cast off their savage habits and become an interesting, civilized, and Christian community. As you can see, the westernization of indigenous communities was more so a selfless act, as both American and Native American futures were taken into account. Using that common mindset and practice, it can be inferred that the Germanization of occupied territories was to comfort the German people since they were going through sudden changes. As previously stated, Goering would do anything for his people and country, always looking for ways to protect and benefit them. So when Goering was faced with the issue of dealing with monsters that threatened the well-being of German families, he desperately looked for solutions. He noted that the United States had many common practices when protecting their peoples from those of different races, including sterilizing women of African descent, the Three-Fifths Compromise, keeping white and black people separated, and harsh criminal punishments for interracial marriages. Specific cases that can be identified are the U.S. Supreme Court cases of Plessy v. Ferguson and Buck v. Bell. Buck v. Bell justified the sterilization of a black woman, and Plessy v. Ferguson justified the segregation of black and white peoples. In the 1930s, American newspapers often supported Goering and his party's decisions on the matter by republishing the National Socialist posters about racial purity. The Seattle Times even painted Hitler as a picturesque leader and printed many articles reassuring readers of his peaceful aims, even while reporting on anti-Jewish repression. As my co-counsel discussed, in a letter from Dr. U. Herbert Eiter, he expressed his belief that the field marshal, if I depend on him, would not have gambled on war, as Hitler did in 1939. As will be related in due course, he took a decisive stand for peace in September of 1939. He went on to further state that Germany's foreign policy would have never been conducted in such a way that war should not ensue under any circumstances. The present generation was still feeling the effects of a lost world war. The outbreak of another war would be a shock to the German people. Lastly, I would like to point out a common practice going on in the United States right now: Japanese internment camps. The United States, there are camps in California, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming, 10 camps overall. The U.S. Supreme Court case Korematsu v. United States ruled that the evacuation and internment of Japanese Americans was constitutional. If you're going to take anything away from my speech here today, I'd like you to remember that Hermann Goering was loyal to his country and his people. Anytime he questioned what to do, he helplessly looked onto other countries for common practices he would apply to Germany. Goering had to protect his country from monsters, just as Jackson and Jim Crow laws did to protect their people from their monsters. Goering had to capture those monsters, just as the United States is heroically doing now to their monsters. A crumbling, stressed Goering took inspiration from the United States' needs of national security.
We will now hear from Hermann Goering himself. Please approach this.
Greetings, members of the court. I am Hermann Goering. I am the Reichsmarshal of Germany and was the designated successor to Hitler. I plead not guilty to war crimes, crimes against the peace, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy. Throughout my lifetime, I was a war hero in World War I, president of the Reichstag, plenipotentiary of the four-year plan, head of the economy in Germany, and commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe. Most importantly, I would like to talk to you about my experiences in Germany and why I'm on trial today. My childhood is where my journey started. I was born in 1893, when Germany was still developing. My country was only 22 years old when I was born. The previous chancellor of the German Empire, Otto von Bismarck, had separated Germany from Prussia through the ideas of power and strength. These values heavily influenced what people saw as being important and impressive in my childhood. I grew up in Bavaria with my mother and multiple friends. Since my family was of wealthy heritage in Germany, I met many influential people and built a love for the German people. My father was a diplomat, and he was an inspiration to me. I wanted to fight for my nation's interests like my dad. After going to boarding school, I was enrolled into a military college in Berlin. In 1912, during World War I was put into an infantry regiment for the German army. I could not wait to make my family and the German nation proud. After fighting in the trenches, I was injured and diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I was extremely disappointed in myself, and honestly, I felt like a failure. With rheumatoid arthritis, the army did not want me. I felt worthless and mad at myself. I wanted to fight for Germany, but my body could physically not do it. While I was recovering, one of my friends convinced me to join the Air Force. At first, the Air Force rejected me because of my injury, but I knew I had potential and kept looking for a way in. I persevered and finally got myself into the 25th Air Detachment of the Crown Prince's 5th Army. I proved my skills as a pilot and had 22 confirmed kills over my career in World War I. Because of my heroic efforts, I was given the Iron Cross, making myself a war hero. I felt like I was helping my young nation, but to my surprise, the situation was not how it seemed. When Germany lost World War I was shocked. Germany seemed to have been doing great in the war until suddenly everything collapsed on itself. After the Treaty of Versailles placed unfair blame and consequences on my country for World War I, the nation I loved was gone. From the new Weimar Republic in Germany to the economic depressions, Germany was being undermined and depleted of all national pride. I learned the world was cruel to Germany. Nations did not care about the innocent people inside of Germany. The Air Force was banned, so in 1921, I decided to study history and political science in Munich. I thought studying politics would help me understand the Weimar Republic and what was being changed in Germany. It would help me fight for Germany in a new way. During my studying in Munich, I kept myself up to date on politics and eventually listened to one of Hitler's speeches. His ideas compelled me to join his party. At the time, he seemed to be the only person that had hope for Germany in a time of great darkness. So I joined the Nazi Party, and I had faith that we could bring my beloved nation back to how it used to be. Throughout the rise of the Nazi Party, my knowledge of politics helped me understand that the Nazi Party would be able to thrive if they did not have to worry about opposition. When Hitler and I took over Germany, I felt like a hero for helping my nation out of depression. When World War II started, things took a turn. Hitler's ideas of the nation turned out to be different from mine, but I could not oppose him. He had too much power. I had helped him into power, but gotten myself into a trap. For example, he did not tell me his future goals with the 4-year plan were to start aggressive war until I had worked on it for 2 years. I thought I was just building defense and respect for my German nation, but in reality, I was helping to start war. A war that I did not want to risk my German people for. In terms of the persecution of monsters in Germany, one must look into the eyes of a German in order to understand. Imagine being stripped of your own nation, forgotten about, neglected by the world around you, losing all trust in the world as you know it because of the Treaty of Versailles. On behalf of the German people, I could not risk trusting anyone outside of the German people. For these reasons, I segregated the national security threats and separated them from the economy in Germany. My actions can be compared to the eventual removal of Indians in the United States seen in the Fort Laramie Treaty. The United States could not live with the Native Americans. They lacked the same values. As a result, the United States segregated them and used internment camps to effectively overrun the Native Americans. Near the end of World War II, my love for the German people led to me losing my reputation in the Nazi Party. I was unwilling to sacrifice any more Germans towards the war. When Germany was on the brink of defeat, I stayed in my estate, 300 miles from Hitler, refusing to die with him. I even requested to take over Hitler's role when he was stuck in his bunker in Berlin. I intended to surrender, but he immediately accused me of high treason and warranted my arrest. Hitler was careless with the German people. He was selfish. He was willing to sacrifice all of the German people when he had no hope left, something I could never do. I acted in favor of my beloved German people, not myself.
We will now begin direct examination. Defense, we will begin with you.
Mr. Gurn, it is my partner and my inference that you use effective common practices done by the United States and other countries. Is that true? And if so, can you recall any you took into consideration?
Yes, I look towards the United States' use of the Indian Removal Act and the 3/5 Compromise for ways to segregate people from a nation and the common public.
You stated you look towards the United States. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
When Germany was faced with national security threats, I looked towards the United States' ways of coping with them. Yeah, they were a good influence for my ideas and regarding national security threats.
How did other countries react when those you work with started to put those common practices in place?
Actually, the Seattle Times newspaper posted multiple propaganda posters from the National Socialist Party in their own newspaper in the U.S. And I also do remember the occurrence where a boat of German Jewish people actually went to the United States and was denied access. So that occurrence helped me feel more comfortable with my decision to separate the national security threats from Germany with the German Volk.
Is it true, Mr. Goering, that on March 26th of 1933, you stated to the German folk that they should not wish to practice petty revenge, to be generous, and realize that they also thought differently at one time? And to further quote, did you say, "You were great in suffering and enduring, you were great in standing firm, great in fighting. Now you must show that you are also great in kindness, and especially so towards the many who were missiled"?
Yes, I do recall saying that.
Mr. Goering, you had some pieces of Polish art in your possession in 1940. Could you explain why and what you were doing with them in your possession?
The beautiful Polish art and art from foreign countries was in my possession in order to prevent them from any further destruction. I sorted them out between members of the Reich and even Adolf Hitler.
To my understanding, when giving sentences, you were much more forgiving than those of other judges of the Fuhrer, unless when it came to morality crimes. Do you recall any sentences you might have set for a case of murder or rape?
Yes, in cases of rape, I had no mercy or tolerability with men mistreating women. I would sentence almost every man who committed a rape straight to death. And even one man, I made him be executed in his hometown where he committed the rape. But yeah, Germany should not be a place where women can be mistreated.
Mr. Goering, to my knowledge, you were mostly excluded from foreign policies. However, in September of 1938, one of the few meetings you did attend discussing foreign policy, did you state, "By and large, Germany was cut off from the world's sources of raw materials, and she therefore had to open up resources in her own territory by dint of increased efficiency. This would be done merely in order to make Germany independent of foreign countries, and was not by any means to serve the purpose of preparing for an aggressive war."
Yes, I did not want Germany's foreign policies to commence another war. The German people were already scarred from the First World War, and if we start another one, it could be devastating.
What was your motive for creating the Gestapo in 1933?
The Gestapo was created in order to bring Germany back from the Depression. If the Nazi Party had little opposition, it could thrive and it could bring Germany back to the way it used to be. Yeah, but then I did give it over in 1944 to Heinrich Himmler when the Gestapo got out of hand and I had other matters to address.
And lastly, why did you create the Luftwaffe?
I created the Luftwaffe to defend Germany. It was a byproduct of the four-year plan, and with the four-year plans essentially allowed Germany to not trust other countries with resources. So since the Air Force was ended from the Treaty of Versailles, it was restarted because we didn't have to trust foreign countries for supplying us, and it was meant to defend the German people and keep them out of foreign countries' hands.
We will now begin cross-examination. Prosecution will begin on your behalf.
Mr. Goering, is it true your plenipotentiary of the four-year plan? Yes, it is. Evidence document 2827-PS. And is it true your duties for this plan included production of German raw and working materials, distribution of raw materials, utilization of labor, agricultural production, price control, and foreign currency matters? It was, but it was for different reasons.
Is that a yes or a no?
Yes.
Evidence document 710-PS. Is it true you wrote a letter to Reinhard Heydrich about finding a solution to the Jewish question?
Yes, but it was only economically. It was within his
ideas that form the actual solution.
And Mr. Goering, is it true in this letter you told Heydrich, I hereby charge you by making all necessary preparations in regard to organizational and financial matters for bringing about a complete solution of the Jewish question in the German sphere and influence of Europe?
As head of the economy in Germany, I had the ability to help the Jewish solution through the economy, and if there were any Jewish solutions I wanted to,
Mr. Goering, it was a yes or no question.
yes, I did open the economy for the Jewish question.
Evidence document. So on the subject of persecution of Jewish people, is it true you ordered the German Jews to collectively pay the Reich 1 billion Reichmark as seen in evidence document 1412-PS?
Yes, just as the U.S. Segregated the Indians from their own society, the national threats did not have the same values as us, so therefore I needed to separate them from our society.
So it's a yes?
Yes.
Evidence document 2324-PS. Mr. Goering, you wrote the book A Reconstruction of a Nation, correct?
Correct.
Can you please read this excerpt from your book from you? The bracket to the bracket.
I declared at that time before thousands of fellow Germans, each bullet which leaves the barrel of a police pistol now is my bullet. If one calls us murder, then I have murdered. I order all of this, I back it up, I assume the responsibility, and I'm not afraid to do so.
Thank you.
But I must say, I was only head of the SS for 1 year, so that was only for 1 year of time, and that was before World War II.
In this book, you also wrote, thus the concentration camps were created, to which we had to send first of all thousands of functionaries to the Communist and Social Democratic parties. Is that correct?
Yes, in order for the Nazi Party to thrive,
Thank
I
you.
had to,
Evidence document 1406-PS. Did you make a decree regarding the reporting of Jewish-owned property and only Jewish-owned property to the German state?
can you repeat that?
Evidence document 1406-PS. Did you make a decree regarding the reporting of Jewish-owned property and only Jewish-owned property to the German state?
Are you referring to a piece of evidence?
I am. Would you like to see it?
Can I see it real quick?
Computer. Every Jew shall report and evaluate in accordance with the following instructions his entire domestic and foreign property and state.
Yes.
And this order was signed. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Evidence document 1584-I-PS. Mr. Goering, did you take part in expanding the Air Force, which violated the Treaty of Versailles?
I expanded the Air Force in order to defend the German people.
So is that a yes?
Yeah.
In document D-783, you agree to the lynch law of captured British airmen, correct?
Correct.
This law states British prisoners of war can be lynched upon their capture, which you agree to, correct?
Well, if prisoners of war did not obey to the German rules and did not help Germany fight the war, they would be at the bottom of the supply chain. So therefore, they could be mistreated possibly.
So the answer is correct. The answer is yes.
I was not completely aware of that, but sure.
A letter was sent requesting your permission, to which you replied, to which was replied that the Reichsmarschall agrees with this law.
Sure. I was doing many things at that time though.
Okay. Did you support the work of the Eidenstab?
Yes.
And is it true the Eidenstab were responsible for stealing cultural goods from occupied territories?
It was only to protect them from destruction.
Then why did some of this art go to your private collection?
Because I had a large estate and that was the most safe place for them.
I feel German
At that time of
museums
destruction.
would be much safer than your own private collection.
Hmm?
I feel museums would be safer than your private
I mean,
collection.
some of it did go to German museums
But why would some of it go to your private collection as well?
because as leaders of Germany, I mean, we are the most protected people of the German land, and it's only right to have part of our country's dominated region stuff in our own hands.
In the evidence document 1208-PS, in 1938, you wrote a widespread order concerning the Jewish question. Is this correct?
Correct, but only in some ways.
Did you write the order?
Correct, I did write it.
And in this decree, you call for, quote, the elimination of Jews from the German economic life, end quote. Is this correct?
Yes, that is, yeah, removing them from the economic life because they did not have the same value.
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
The tribunal will now ask some questions. Can the defense please approach the stage? We just have a clarifying question. So you said that Goering was saving Germany from the monsters knocking at the door. Could you clarify if you consider these monsters to be?
We consider them to be those of communists, Jewish peoples, and Poles.
Thank you. Can the prosecution please approach the stand? We just have a clarifying question with you about Kristallnacht. Could you just clarify what Goering's role was in this event the night it happened?
Goering was present at a conference before where Himmler stated police were not supposed to help Jews, and he took a big part in this conference. And the day after, the police, who he endorsed as the defendant read the quote, arrested over 30,000 Jews in persecution of their religious beliefs.
Now we would like to ask the defendant questions. Okay, following the Treaty of Versailles, which specifically limited Germany's army and navy, how do you explain engaging in the 4-year plan with the express purpose of going against that treaty and remilitarizing Germany?
Well, when Germany lost World War I, we were weak, we were vulnerable, and when that happened, the Treaty of Versailles occurred, and it put very unfair consequences on our country. And I realized that when Germany did not have power and strength, it would be mistreated, and it would be by foreign countries. So I participated in the 4-year plan in order to bring Germany back to how it used to be and have a good reputation with foreign countries in order to not be messed around with.
And what was the imminent threat that made the defensive Air Force necessary?
The imminent threat was foreign countries, foreign countries and the Jews. The Treaty of Versailles made us have no defense, so we needed it. I brought the Air Force back as a way to show that the German people could do something. We had hope in our nation, and we had power. We weren't just controlled by foreign countries. And yeah, the Air Force was created behind the idea that we want to defend the German people by any threat necessary.
The defense and prosecution both brought up things about how your art collection and the defense said that you prioritize your art collection, but how can you defend the prosecution saying that this art was plundered and stolen?
I mean, it was taken from the foreign occupation of it. So, I mean, it went back to Germany. It was not. I mean, if you dominate a territory, is it not right to have some sort of ownership over its goods? And yeah, we took it into Germany because we wanted to show that we're a proud nation.
Thank you.
Panel 1 will now take a short recess while panel 2 comes up for the next case. Thank you.
Wait a second. We've got closing statements from both sides.
We will now hear prosecution's closing statement. Prosecution, please approach the stand.
Your Honors, throughout this case, Prosecutor Stefan and I have brought your attention towards a countless of crimes Hermann Goering has committed, undeniably being guilty for conspiracy, crimes against the peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Goering was practically the basis of the Nazi Party, making his every move vital to the outcome of World War II and everything between his first job within the Nazi Party. His constant contribution to the Nazi Party, taking innocent lives, basing their murders off of an unthinkable and unimportant set of expectations set by the Nazi Party, violating multiple treaties, putting the citizens of Germany at risk, and involving himself in the German military. Goering was tied to the innumerable attacks held against opposing territories that violated the treaties of Saint-Germain, the Treaty of Versailles, and the treaties of mutual guarantees. The defense mentioned how Goering's intentions were never to hurt anyone or wage aggressive war. Yet there are multiple evidence documents justifying his true intentions and direct quotes of him saying, so including in evidence 3775-PS, where he states the amount of damage that he and his army caused with the bombings in Britain, with his signature being apparent at the bottom of the document. Goering's main roles that inflicted his actions in the Nazi Party and committing the crimes of all indictments were plenipotentiary of the four-year plan, head of the Luftwaffe, creator of the SA, and the head of the Air Force. Goering did in fact choose to support the Nazi Party himself and the views that came with them, making him fully responsible for his actions. He was constantly involved in Germany's economy, which is what the four-year plan's main concern was, giving him the obligation to do whatever he could to benefit his country, even if it was clearly illegal. He was also avid to fulfilling Hitler's ideas, which was wiping the Jewish population from the human race. Goering was heavily involved in the creation of concentration, death, and labor camps, making him responsible for the tens of millions of deaths that took place in these camps. He was part of creating ghettos and was the one that gave orders to how the Jews were to be treated in those ghettos. He treated prisoners of war like animals, rationing their food, mistreating them by forced labor, and murdering them. Goering must be held accountable for the crimes he committed and that he admitted to committing. I leave you here with a thought. How would you feel if a murderer, manipulator, and threat to the human race ran free with no punishment? Thank you.
We will now hear defense's closing statement. Defense will approach the stage.
Your Honors, the first notion I'd like to address is the prosecution's assertion that Goering was responsible for the formation of an aggressive Gestapo. Goering was only in charge of the Gestapo from 1933 to 1934, just 1 year. Goering's Gestapo was underwhelming and did not achieve much in its one formative year. Previously, Prosecutor Bremen confirmed that Heinrich Himmler was in charge of the majority of dealing with the Jewish question. Mr. Goering is not to blame for Himmler's actions regarding the Gestapo from 1934 on. I'd also like to clarify and emphasize that the monsters my co-counsel mentioned, and you, Your Honor, inquired about, were involved in setting ablaze public buildings such as the Reichstag and had a history of violence and crime in Germany. These monsters, in no circumstance, were innocent. I'd like to bring up the years of American fear of communism, which is the same fear Germany holds. Multitudes of American newspapers state that communism is godless and would destroy American life. Communism is seen as a national threat to the United States, like it was to Germany. Hermann Goering is not guilty of engaging in conspiracy with the Nazi Party, committing crimes against peace, war, or humanity. His true motives were adamantly revealed today under oath, and unsurprisingly, they were ones of protection and peace. Mr. Goering, throughout his lifetime, has minimized the loss of life. He served in the First World War, and as a veteran, he is conditioned to protect his people. He did only what was necessary to improve and save the lives of the American people. His awareness of the German people's unpreparedness for war as a result of the Treaty of Versailles establishes his innocence. I request that Your Honors consider these questions. Why would Goering, an honorable man known for serving his country, not only bring about war, but betray his own people to wage aggressive and unnecessary warfare. Additionally, why would Goering risk his reputation by instigating another war, which he even acknowledged that he could not win with the current state of the German people? Goering would never put his own people in a state of endangerment or humiliation, and he would never put his country in a position to lose a second war. He did everything in his power to defend the German people, and that involved stopping the monsters threatening them. His thought processes were logical, and he even had the support of America, who was represented at this tribunal at a point in 1938. Even when in great danger and distress, Mr. Goering repeatedly preached generosity, gentleness, and kindness to the Volk on the topic of foreign affairs. On behalf of Hermann Wilhelm Goering, thank you for the time you've given us to discuss this case today.
Tribunal Group 1 will now take a short break while Tribunal 2 comes in for the next case. Thank you.
All right.